Introduction to Configuration Management. My name's John Rearick. I work at Iowa State University doing Drupal websites. I'm an organizer for Drupal Corn Camp in Iowa. You can find me on Twitter at jrearick, and I have a website, babas.com, where I post blogs sometimes, and you'll find this presentation and my last presentation there as well. So, overview. What are we going to talk about here? What problem does configuration management solve? So, we don't want to have to do stuff if we don't have to. And then what is configuration management? How did we do it in Drupal 7? How are we doing it in Drupal 8? And then we'll have a little bit of walk along, pointy-clicky, figure out how to actually do it, go through the process. So, what problem does configuration management solve? In order to understand the problem, we need to understand how, in vague terms, how a site is put together. So a site you can think of is composed of code and content and then configuration. Code is, well, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's all the PHP files, your Twig files, everything that you edit and manage in your IDE and commit to Git, and all the dependencies that come in and all that stuff. They're all stored on the file system, on your web server. That's pretty straightforward. Content, this is actual, usually stuff in the database, but also can be like files in the files folder. So these are nodes, entities, field values, all that sort of stuff that your site maintainers or site editors use and do on a daily basis. It's the stuff that your people are coming to see the site for. And then there's configuration. So this is things that uses the code, and then you can configure the code to do certain things. And in Drupal, this is really a lot because it's so flexible out of the box. I mean, we got views, we got content types, we got fields, different kinds of fields with different configurations for those fields, how they display, what's the layout, and all this stuff is also stored in the database with your content. So how many of you are familiar with the dev, stage, production workflow? Yeah, a few hands, some, okay. So ideally, when you're doing a dev, stage, production workflow, you want to have your code and configuration moving from development to staging to production. And you notice that the content on production isn't changing. That stays on production. But it's okay to copy it back to stage or development to do work on. In reality, our configuration is stored in the database. And the database is not something you can easily pull apart configuration and content out of. It's really difficult, if not impossible, to merge databases, especially when you have content that's constantly updated on production. So what happens if, in this example here, we have production database or production content, that's the file with the number 1 on it, and then we've got like test stuff. Maybe we copied it over, but we added nodes with foo and bar and put up cat pictures and stuff just to test what we're doing, right? And so, okay, great, it's time to deploy it. We need that configuration up there. So we're moving the database up. Stage looks good, cat pictures are fine. All right, we move it to production. What's going to happen now when we move the database from stage to production? You blow away your production database and content, and you end up with cat pictures on your very serious website. So, what is configuration management? Well, it tries to solve this problem, right? It tries to remove configuration from the database so that you can revision it like you do your code and deploy it like you can do with your code. In Drupal 7, features was the go-to module for this. How many of you used features before? Yeah? Yeah, everybody? So, those of you who've used features know kind of some of the pitfalls that it has. Its main purpose was built so that you can move features between different sites, not necessarily to move configuration within your own environments. So it's kind of a repurposed tool that wasn't quite designed for what people are using it for. So yeah, the drawbacks is intended to copy features between sites. And then I've always found exports, whenever you rebuilt a feature, sometimes it would pick up on another configuration that you didn't intend to put in there. It is very hard to read the diffs. So yeah. And not all configuration was available for export because there wasn't a single configuration system to be able to standardize how configuration could be brought out of the database. So Drupal 8, we have this configuration management system. Comes in core. So all the modules are pretty much expected to use it. And it's actually pretty easy to use on a developer side if you're developing modules and stuff. I was a little hesitant about it at first, but it's grown on me. And in Drupal 8, configuration can be exported out to YAML files and stored with the code. So this allows you to store it in Git with the rest of your code and be able to revision it, revert it, see the diffs, look at it in a merge request on GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket. It was built, intended to copy configuration between environments of the same site. There's still some development going on. If you heard about the Configuration Management Initiative 2.0, I think Dries might have talked about it at the DrupalCon keynote a little bit, about extending configuration management to be more flexible and possibly in those ways. But for now, it's just between your own site. So as I said, active configuration when you're actually using the site is still actually stored in the database. But yeah, you can export it to the YAML files and store it with the code. By default, everything's in the database unless you do something. You can also import these YAML files into the active database. So you can import and export the configuration on whenever you want to. The reason why we have it in the database is because with the YAML files, we have tons and tons of files. I mean, I think when I tested this out with a base Drupal install and I exported the config, it was 177 files. So having to, on every page load, read all those files to see what configuration you need, that could be a performance issue, and we've got it solved on the database end. Plus, you got things like Memcache or Redis that you can cache the database stuff intelligently. So, where are these YAML config files found? So your site configuration, by default, is in your files directory, so where all the public files are, and then in a folder called config, and then a long string of hashes, and then in a folder called sync. The idea of having this config hash thing is to kind of hide it from people just kind of randomly trying to see the configurations of your site, because it is publicly readable by the internet. That's why I say change this in your settings.php to somewhere that's outside your web root, if you're going to be using it. If you're using the Drupal Composer project, I think it automatically does that for you. sets that up in settings.php. And we'll take a look at how to do that in a little bit. Modules, themes, profiles, they come with configuration too. They usually come with default configuration. So when you install it for the first time, it will install the configuration based on what's in the module directory. There's a config install folder where you can find YAML files that represent the default config after you install it. They also have this optional folder. So sometimes modules can work with other modules, but if you don't have that module, it's all right. And you don't want to install the configuration for something that doesn't exist. So there's an optional one that will import configuration based on certain dependencies. Most of that you don't really need to worry about unless you're an actual module developer or you're developing, modules. So how do I use it? This is the fun part. I'm going to do some demo. So I've got a couple of environments here. This is my dev environment, so this could be like my local environment. And then I have a production environment, which is exactly the same. It's the same site copied over. The database is copied over into a new database. And at this point, the databases are exactly the same. So this is like a brand new deployment of a brand new site. And we know stuff is not, moving at this point. This is just a base Drupal 8 install. There's nothing else added to it except I put a Git repo in there in case we want to take a look at that. So on the dev site, which is the white screen here, I'm just going to go ahead and add a node just to see basic page, ASDF. Hopefully if that's, oops, okay, let's put that on the front page. Front page. All right, so now we have some weird content on our dev site that's not on our production site, and we don't want on our production site. All right, so to access the configuration management stuff, it's already there under configuration. And then the development block here, we got configuration and synchronization. And then here, by default, there's nothing there to synchronize, and because there's nothing in our config folder right now. So everything is an active configuration, hasn't been exported, imported, or anything like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to export the default configuration that we have currently, or the default active configuration that's on the site. We can click that button here. And what this does is it downloads a archive file. If I open it up here, you see that big list of files. So we can take a look at maybe system, what do I call it? System site YAML. So if I open that up, that bigger, we can see the configuration. Oops, this one. ENT, make it big for you. Is that big enough? All right. So you can see how easy it is to read. This is the system site information. So this is the site name. The slogan isn't defined. The email address for everything, what your 404 page, what your front page is. It's all just YAML, and it's mostly human readable. So that's one of the big benefits of this. So that's how a YAML file looks. The UUID helps the system know what site this goes to, and I'm not quite sure what this config hash thing is. So, all right, now that we've taken a look at this, let's place it in the config where we want to put the config on the site, since this is just sitting in our downloads folder. All right, let's new window here, sites, dev. So this is a composer project from the Drupal composer project. So it automatically puts the config directory in the root, but not the web where Drupal is going, which is nice. And we got the config sync folder. There's a nice README that tells you, hey, what's going on? And if we copy all this stuff, we should be good. If I go to terminal here, because this is a dev environment, I don't have configuration or permissions set quite right. Let's see, config. So we want this sync folder to be available to the web server to read and write if we're using the UI in order to read and write this information. If you do it with Drush, then you don't need to be able to have the web server to have write permission. All right. So hopefully, now that we have all this stuff in our config sync folder, we can go back to our dev site here and take a look. Good. We don't have any differences. There are no configuration changes. So what this says is that either there's absolutely no configuration there, or the configuration in the files is exactly the same as the configuration in the database, which is a good place to be when you're on production. So let's make a configuration change. So we changed branding. We're not blue anymore. So we need to change this to green. So we can change this theme setting and make it green. Sorry if this looks horrid. Hit save. It says configure options have been saved. We look at the home page. We see it's green. Now, when we go to configuration synchronization, we see, oh, here's some settings that have changed. You see the color module for the theme Bartik, and then the Bartik settings. And even without the diff module, we can view the differences. So the theme Bartik module, staged is what's in your YAML files. Active is what's in your database. And so you can see that we've added configurations. And apparently before, defaults were null. So it just used normal defaults. So there was nothing there before. So it's going to create a new file, a new YAML file for the color theme Bartik configuration. You can see it adds all these things in the YAML file. You can see the difference in Bartik as well. We're adding some Bartik settings. You might be tempted to hit the import button here. When you're on dev, that's not, that will blow away the work that you've done in the configuring right here, because it's going to import from the YAML files into the database and stomp over the changes you've made. So be careful about that, because I know sometimes in features that was kind of a problem to get used to, knowing, am I importing or exporting or reverting or all that stuff. So keep in mind. All right, next page. So let's export these files again. Unpack them. There's the new one. And we have our config sync folder here. Dev config sync. Copy all that stuff over. Yeah, I'll just replace it all because it's, whoa, okay. I don't own it. So we're replacing it, all of it. I'm going to go ahead and run that again so that we have the permissions. So now, there are no changes now. It's great. And now, this change is now recorded in files in the file system, which is great. So, how do we do this? Well, I suppose you're using Git. How many of you are using Git to manage your sites? Yeah? Or something similar? You could probably do this with FTP and stuff, or through the interface. Export the file, go to the production site, import from there. But this is kind of a best practice to, version control your code, which is, half the good stuff about configuration management. Git status. So I've got all these files added to my config sync folder. Let's go ahead and commit those. Oops, dev site, please. Git and all that stuff. I love permission problems. All right, let's try that again. That's fair. All right. New config. All right, so we've committed. Git log shows we've got that new commit. Git status shows we're good. At this point, I would push it up to our repository, and then I can go over to our production database, or production, or stage if we're going from dev. And from here, we can do a git pull. And of course, I don't own this stuff again. Permission problems are fun. Alright, let's try to get ordered. DS store files, I should have put that in my Git account. Alright, so I'm behind. I went to Git pull. There we go. Now we brought in all of our YAML files to the production site. Status, git log, you see our commit here, that's where we're at. Good. So we got the files there, and now we log into our site. And we go to configuration, it's in place, configuration synchronization, and we see our changes are here, staged. And this time, things are flipped. We got the stuff is staged on the right, and we're adding the file to the active configuration. So we can say, go ahead, import all. We go home, we should be green. Maybe? Quick cache is always a good friend. test permissions. This didn't happen when I was down dry running this. Apologies for this. What are you not loading? Huh. Is it just a logo? Okay. Well, we definitely changed something. Let's take a look at our configuration synchronization here. No changes. Hold on, go cold. Need to configure and see if imports if not. Oh, change, so that's strange. Probably shouldn't have done a configuration that included a file. Well, oh well, we'll roll with it. Color change, all right, so we were able to get configuration up, and this is why you have a good staging server too, so you can test the deployment. So you can also use, instead of the pointy-clicky, you can use Drush to automate this as part of your deployment pipeline. So I can go through a few of those Drush commands to show you what's going on there. So let's go back to the dev site and see what's there. All right, so let's get our terminal up here. That's production. This is dev, good. All right, let's go to our web root. Is Drush working? Good, all right. So Drush has a bunch of configuration management commands. So can you see the command line okay? Okay. There's Drush config status, CST is the short way to do it. And this is kind of the same thing that would show up on your synchronization page. So let's make a quick change, I guess. Let's change our site name. Oops. Configuration, basic site settings, my site. When we do that, terminal, we do CST again, you can see system site is different. There's probably more arguments you can do to see what the diffs are and all that stuff. So this is good. You can see what's different and if it's expected as a developer or as you're trying to deploy the site. Excuse me. You can export it from here too. So Drush, CEX, configuration, export. And here it'll show you, if you don't do the -y, of course, you can see what's going to happen. You're going to update system.site configuration. The YAML files in your export directory, config sync, wherever that is, will be deleted and replaced with the active config. Are you sure? This is a little warning. Make sure that you're aware of the consequences. So we say, go ahead and say yes, config sync. I'm going to do a git status here. Now we see our system sites YAML file has changed. I can do a git diff. And I can see that the name was changed from Drush site install to my site. It's easy to read the diffs and git. It's awesome. So I can git commit this again. Whoops, let's add it. How about we, oops. All right, we got that committed, push it, and then we can go on to production and pull it. And since this doesn't depend on the colors, I can just do a git pull. All right, so now we've got the updated YAML file, and it's not imported into active config yet. All right, we got to do the configuration import. So Drush, and there's a Drush command for that as well. CIM, configuration import. We do that, and it says, okay, here's the things that are going to set, that are going to change when you import it. So another opportunity to set back and make sure you're doing it right. But if this is automated, you can hit the -Y, and it's just going to blow through. So it's only going to make the changes. It's not going to, I guess it doesn't matter if it replaces everything. It can just do it. So let's go ahead and do that. And configuration was imported successfully. And for good measure, clear cache, because you can't do that enough in Drupal, right? So Drush site install, if I refresh it, it's now my site. Sweet. So we've seen how to move configuration around. We see that the production site here doesn't have that node that we made on the dev site, so we're not mashing on actual content. Things can be happening in a controlled way. We can revision it. We can automate the deployment. We can, we can have control over our configuration now, and it's great. But wait a second, this sounds kind of dangerous. I accidentally changed the name of the site. That's a pretty important piece of configuration that I don't want to be accidentally changed. Is there anything we can do about that and how to prevent that? Well, yeah. There are ways around this. The simple way for simple configuration, like say a site name, is called a configuration override. And you can do this in your site's settings.php file. So let's take a look at our settings.php file. Let's do the production, right? Yeah, we'll do the dev one, that's fine. So I said before in settings.php you can determine what folder that your configuration sync folder is in, and this is the line to do that. It's pretty straightforward. So let's go ahead and add a configuration override. Yeah, let's sudo this. Let's see here. So we're going to change the site name to production, I guess. So that's always going to be production. So we can do config. You can kind of see this system logging configuration. It's kind of a good example here. And we looked at the and inside the system.site.yaml file, we have the key name, and we can call this production. All right. Save it. Clear cache for good measure. Refresh it. Make sure I didn't have a typo. Oh, we're on the dev site, that's right. All right, so now it says production instead of food bar or whatever I had it before. If you take a look at the configuration, you won't see that change. That change isn't there, even though the YAML file still says whatever it was. And this can be kind of confusing because if you go to configuration, site settings, it still says it's my site. If I put something new in there, I hit save. It says it's been saved. Your site name is whatever you put it in. If you go back home, it's still production. So this is like the hammer, right? It slams on everything. That's the authoritative source of configuration. So this configuration is used after the database does its thing. And because we made that change in our configuration synchronization here, you should see that it changed here as well. So even if you import and export the configuration YAML files, it's not going to change the display of that configuration. So what are the limitations of the Drupal 8 configuration management? It's currently intended to only copy configuration between environments. It is not intended to share across different sites. You can make it do that. It's actually, we do that. And there's some documentation out there how people have done it in the past. And it kind of works. But there's the the features module still exists in Drupal 8 for its intended purpose of sharing between the sites, but it's still kind of a pain. And then when you get configuration dependencies and stuff, that's also even harder to figure out when you're doing features. There is the Configuration Management 2.0 initiative currently in progress, or getting started, or whatever, which seems promising to make configuration management even better. So here's a few modules I found. What I've covered here is all completely in core. So that's pretty powerful. But we can extend it and do other things. State read here. Okay. Configuration override warned. Remember when I was saving configuration after I had set it in the settings.php file? It looked like it changed it, but it actually didn't. And you get confused. Config override warned will warn you when that's the case, so that when you're trying to debug something, why isn't this deploying? And you forgot that you had that configuration override in there. This will help you save a lot of time. Then there's a configuration read only. This adds a way you can put in your settings.php file to set a configuration that says that in this environment, do not allow any configuration anywhere in the UI to be changed. So this is really good if you're really laying down the hammer on configuration changes in production. If you're going to have a very strict workflow of this stuff has to go through the process in order to get to production. I haven't used it because we usually don't grant our users access to change configuration. And there can be also a blurred line between configuration and content. Sometimes you might think a block should really be configuration because It's kind of part of the site. Like you have a link, you made a regular link block that links to a view to do stuff. And it's really not content, but since it's an entity, it's content and it's not configuration. So there are a few places like that, and also in the reverse, where you think, oh, this is content, but it's really configuration. Yeah, so you'll run into those and figure out the small bits there. And hopefully, I know web form module has run into that a lot. Am I working on that, or I don't know. Then there's configuration split. This allows you to break up your configuration when you import it. So it depends on configuration filter module, which allows you to split your configuration when you're importing it, so that when you're in a certain environment, you can import configuration from this folder. When you're in a different environment, you can import configuration on this folder, and that way, say like in development, you want the devel module installed all the time. And enabling that module all the time in development is really useful, saves us time as developers because we like using the tools in there. But we don't want to get that into production. And so we can have devel configuration split off into a different folder. And if you're interested in config split, that's the next session across the hall. Yeah, so using config split to split your config across environments and sites. That's Josh Fabian. That's tomorrow, or today, 3 o'clock, 15 minutes across the hall, room 237. Some interesting reads that I found. The documentation on Drupal.org for configuration management is actually pretty good. I was very surprised when I found this, like, this is very straightforward. It explains things in terms that are not like core developer oriented. Yeah. So yeah, I can recommend actual Drupal.org documentation. Dries had a blog post recently on the Configuration Management Initiative 2.0 stuff, and M. Potter, one of the big guys behind features, has a blog post out advocating for people to stop using features, a guide to Drupal 8 configuration management, which is an interesting read if you're wondering, do I need to use features or should I be using raw configuration management? I had discussions with them in Baltimore DrupalCon when we were first getting started, like, how are we going to do this? Are we going to do features? How hard is it to actually do configuration management for what we're trying to do? And it turned out, don't need to use features. It's fine. Doesn't hurt his feelings. So yeah, you can get these links off of the PDF on my website after the fact. They'll be on the node on the Flyover camp as well. So thank you.